Welcome to the Comedy Reset Spotlight. This is the place to be if you want to hear from some of the most innovative and exciting comedy creators from around the globe. On this podcast, you'll hear from a variety of guests who are pushing the boundaries of what comedy can be. If you're looking for fresh perspectives and new ideas, this is the podcast for you.
Episode 16. From Long Island, New York, comedian Jeff Goldberg.
When did you first start doing stand-up comedy?
I started doing stand-up in mid-2021 after a conversation with a coach. I've been using humor for almost 20 years as a professional speaker on stage training sales audiences, because when you train people and you spend an entire day with them, you've got to do something to keep them awake and involved. And I found humor and comedy was the best way to do that. However, in a conversation with my coach, we were talking about how I will often step over the line in a corporate engagement and then get the beckoning finger from human resources afterwards asking, "Hey, Jeff, did you really say this in front of our team today?" And I would have to admit that I did and apologize and promise to never do it again. Anyways, my coach said, you should go do stand-up comedy because that way you can say whatever you want and get all that stuff out of your system. And that way you'll be appropriate in front of corporate audiences. So I signed up to take a course at Governor's on Long Island. And that was the beginning of my comedy career. And I've never looked back.
What made you want to become a stand-up comedian?
Well, I guess like so many others, I was almost preordained to become a stand-up comedian. The words I heard most often growing up in school were, excuse me, Mr. Goldberg, I think you know the way to the principal's office. And certainly my principal and I were on a first name basis. I was definitely a class clown. I would never raise my hand. I would just shout out whatever was on my mind. And my favorite thing was to get the class laughing. So it was almost a given that I was going to at some point do stand-up comedy. And I've always been a fan, growing up with people like, Carlin and, Richard Pryor and people like that. They were just gods to me. It was like, oh my God, if you can do that, if you can make people laugh just by the things you say, what better job could there possibly be? So it was almost like it was my destiny to eventually get in front of audiences and give them the gift of laughter.
Who were some of your influences?
Influences? Wow, that's a long list. I mean, I can certainly remember seeing people like Alan King and Phyllis Diller and Buddy Hackett growing up. Bill Cosby was one of my favorites early on. And then people like Cheech and Chong and Richard Pryor. I mean, when I first saw that Live on Sunset Strip video, it was life-changing. It was just brilliant. And Eddie Murphy, Chris Rock. I mean, I love them all. I love listening to funny, smart people. Today, people like Chappelle and Anthony Jeselnik. I mean, they're just brilliant at what they do. Incredibly inspiring. And I know I'm not on their level yet, but I'm sure working hard to someday be somewhere near as good as any of them are.
What was your first time on stage like?
My first time on stage? Well, I think I had a slight advantage to many of the people that I went up with the first time, in that I had already been on stages for many, many years doing my job as a professional speaker and trainer. So getting on stage wasn't the tough part. It's, was the writing. And then, of course, the nerves. I've been doing my job for so long that walking onto a stage, there's no nerves. It's kind of just, it's what I do. But I have to admit that very first time going up to do stand-up comedy, it was pretty terrifying because you're naked up there. And I was very fortunate. The first time I went up was in front of an audience of 230 people at Governor's on Long Island. Certainly till today, my favorite club. So slightly nerve-wracking, but I find that every single time it's once I actually take that microphone, I forget everything else and it's just me and the audience and it all seems to somehow work out. So, slight nerves and then it's exhilaration. It's like, come on, baby, let's get to it. Let's go have some fun.
What's your favorite joke?
I'm not sure that I have a favorite joke, but I can tell you this. I really like intelligent comedy. I like when you don't see the punchline coming, when it's a complete shock. That's one of the reasons I love Anthony Jeselnik so much. You never, ever see the punch coming. And, clearly you've got to be pretty smart to be writing like that. So I like intelligent humor that makes you think, maybe that drives a point home. And I like silly humor too. So favorite joke, don't know that I have one, but something that makes you think is really my favorite, something smart.
What's the worst heckler experience you've ever had?
Well, I've been very fortunate. I've only been doing this about a year and a half, and I have yet to have a heckler. I'm not complaining about that, and I'm not quite sure what I'll say when it happens, and I'm sure it will eventually. I'm sure I'm due for somebody to go, "You suck," or something like that, but haven't had a heckler yet, so I can't really tell you what's going to happen, and I certainly haven't had a bad heckler experience.
What's the best gig you've ever had?
The best gig I've ever had. That's a tough one too. I know that I feel I get better and better each and every time I go up. So each one seems to be better than the last, and maybe each one is the best. I guess in terms of audience size, it was really the first time I was in front of an audience, which was about 230 people. So that certainly was thrilling. But I've had one gig that didn't go terrific, and the rest seemed to go pretty well. I'm not saying I'm the most brilliant genius comedic mind of our time, and I know I've still got a lot to learn. And again, every time I get better and better. But I don't know if I have one single best gig. I guess my favorite though would be my very first time.
What's the worst gig you've ever had?
The worst gig I did was shortly after I started doing stand-up. A local business person who also runs a charity found out that I was doing stand-up comedy and asked me if I'd like to perform at her charity event, which of course I was thrilled. I had only just started, and I had about maybe 6 minutes. And she goes, "Can you do a half an hour?" And I said, no, half an hour. The gig was 2 weeks from the date that I was talking to her about. I said, no, I can't put together another 20 plus minutes in 2 weeks, but let me bring in some other comedians. Anyways, the reason this was the worst gig I ever did was because it was a charity for kids with autism, and it was done in a huge ballroom over dinner, and the autistic kids were there too. And as you can imagine, some of them were kind of a little noisy, maybe jumping up and down. Some of them were actually getting up out of their seats and running around while the gig was going on. And because I was so new to this was actually my first paid gig. I didn't really know how to handle it. Fortunately, I was the host, and there were two really great pros, a gentleman named Chris Williamson and Chris Roach, two very funny guys, and they handled it beautifully, but I didn't do so well. They both patted me on the back and said I did great, but it's one of those gigs where you knew you just didn't know what you were doing. So that would have been my worst gig for sure.
How do you deal with stage fright?
I think I'm very fortunate in terms of stage fright because I have so much time on stage in my history. As a professional sales trainer, I'm on stage regularly. So I've been in front of both large and small audiences all over the world. So stage fright really isn't a thing for me. In fact, my mentor in the speaking and training business, very shortly after I started in that business, we went up to Boston to do a training gig together. And the night before, we were having cocktails. And he said, "You know what, Jeff, you're going to be great in this business." And I was excited to hear that coming from, a guy who I really looked up to. He was great at our job. And I said, "What makes you say that I'm going to be great at this?" And he looked right at me and said, "Because you're weird." And I had to take a moment. I have to admit, I was taken aback. Why would me being weird make me good at the job? And I actually said to him, "Steve, I'm not quite sure what you're saying here. What does weird have to do with being good at the job?" He goes, "Well, the way most people are wired up is their number one fear in life is public speaking. But you, like me," and he's talking about himself, "you, like me, can't wait to get on the stage." So I'm very fortunate. I don't really have stage fright. I do get slightly nervous each time, just as I'm just about to go up, because I'm really committed to giving the audience, the best I possibly can, the best show I possibly can. And, there's always the thing where, you tell a joke one night and it works great, and the next night it doesn't. But stage fright, not really an issue.
How do you prepare for a show?
In order to prepare for a show, I'll write out my set list in bullet points on an index card. Sometimes I'll the whole thing into a virtual teleprompter and rehearse it standing up, looking into my computer screen, reading off the teleprompter. But certainly for 2 or 3 days in advance of a show, I'll rehearse it while I'm walking my dog. And certainly the day of the show. I live by the ocean, so I walk my dog on the beach, and I'll just be doing my set out loud, typically also on the way to a set, whether I'm in the car or on a train. I'll be saying it out loud again. But at some point, you've done everything you can, and what's going to happen is going to happen. But yeah, I definitely like to rehearse at least 5 or 6 times the day of the show to make sure that I've got a pretty damn good idea of what I'm going to say.
What's the best advice you've ever been given about stand-up comedy?
I think some of the best advice I've ever been given is to stop trying to tell jokes and try more to have a conversation with the audience, to involve the audience more. I'm working on getting better and better at crowd work. It's one of my favorite things to watch when it's done well. And up until fairly recently, I've hesitated because I'm so focused on remembering my next joke, my next line, to make sure I get through everything and also stick to the time I'm supposed to, that I've hesitated to do crowd work, but I've started to do it more and more, and I really love it. So I think the best thing is that I've ever heard was just try to have a conversation with the audience. When they're involved with you, they tend to like you more. And so I'm working on that.
What's the worst advice you've ever been given about stand-up comedy?
I'm not sure that I've gotten any bad advice about stand-up comedy. I can tell you one of the things I don't love about it, which is bringer shows. I'm not a big fan. I've certainly done a few, but I certainly don't want to ask my friends, every week, can you come pay $20 to watch me do stand-up comedy so that I get to go up? I understand that bringer shows serve a purpose, and I've got nothing against the people who put them on. They're very lovely people. It's just that I want to be put on stage because a promoter thinks I'm funny and can make the audience laugh rather than I can bring 5 people. So while I don't know that I've gotten any bad advice, that's one of the things I like least about stand-up comedy. It's tough to break in when you're brand new and when you don't have a following.
What would you say is the biggest misconception about stand-up comedy?
I think one of the biggest misconceptions about stand-up is that it looks easy, because it's not. When you watch the pros, the people who've been doing this for so long and who are so good at it, it looks like they're just getting up there and riffing effortlessly. But my experience is it takes work to do stand-up comedy. You've got to put in the effort to do the writing, and you got to go to the open mics and rehearse. There's a big difference between being funny enough to make your friends laugh in a diner and being funny enough to get on a stage and give the gift of laughter to an audience. So I'd say the biggest misconception is that anybody can do it. Can anybody do it? Sure. If you're smart enough and funny enough, you can do it, but not everybody is funny.
What do you believe is the key to success in stand-up comedy?
The key to success in stand-up comedy. Well, I'm looking for that one, my friend. I don't know what the key to success is, but I'll just suggest that the key to success in stand-up comedy would be similar to the keys to success in just about anything else. Practice, put in the time, put in the effort, study from people who know what they're doing, ask for feedback, record yourself, listen back to it, work at it just like it's a job. It's the same thing in my field of expertise, which is sales. You don't get to be a great salesperson by just going out and selling. You have to read books and go to seminars and study your craft. And I believe it's the same thing in stand-up. Find people who know what they're doing. Ask them questions. But mainly it's rehearse, perform. I don't think there's any shortcut to getting better. I'm only in this, I think, about a year and a half now. And I think I got my first compliment from a promoter recently, which was, hey, Jeff, wow, you've come a long way in a year and a half, except I know that I've only come a very short way in a year and a half, and I've got a long way to go. So I think the key to success is you got to get up and do it over and over and over again and be open to trying new things.
What do you think is the biggest obstacle that stand-up comedians face?
Yeah, the biggest obstacle is getting booked. It's how do you get stage time? There's bringer shows where if you can bring 2 friends or 3 friends or 5 friends or however many friends that you get to go up. And if you don't have a lot of friends or you don't feel like asking your friends all the time to come, that's a big obstacle. How do you actually get booked? I started producing a show of my own, which I'm not looking to make money on it. I just want stage time. So it's how do you actually get on the stages where you want to? Anybody can go to an open mic and sit with 15 other comedians who aren't laughing at your stuff. But to get on a real stage where people have paid to come see you, that to me is the biggest obstacle. How do you get booked?
What do you think sets stand-up comedy apart from other forms of comedy?
Well, as opposed to, for example, a movie or a TV show that's a comedy, in stand-up, it's you. It's you on a stage with a microphone, naked. And the amazing thing, or one of the interesting things about stand-up comedy, is you get feedback immediately. You know right away whether people like your jokes or don't, because the audience doesn't put up with nonsense. You might get a polite laugh every now and then, but you'll also get boos and heckles. And, what you're looking for is that huge laugh where people are crying and, an applause break. So in stand-up, it's just you and the audience. You're out there. It's you and your brain and your material and how you relate to the audience. So I think that's what sets you apart. It's a solo operation.
What are the benefits of stand-up comedy?
The benefits of stand-up comedy? Well, to the comedian, if they're anything like me, it's heavenly when you tell a joke and it lands. When I tell a joke and the audience is laughing, there's that 2 or 3 seconds or 4 seconds when it's just like heaven. It's like you're in love. When I was a kid, there used to be a game that we would play, a makeout game called 7 Minutes in Heaven. And that's the way I look at stand-up comedy. It's truly, for me, it's 7 or 8 or 10 minutes of heaven between me and the audience. To the audience, there are studies that prove that laughter has great effects on the human brain and the human body. That, the more you laugh, the happier you are, obviously. And don't we all need a little more happiness?
What's your process for writing jokes?
My process for writing jokes? Well, I'm constantly thinking, and anytime a funny thought appears in my brain, I immediately tell Siri to send me an email, and I just dictate the funny thought. I'll make the subject line comedy idea, and then whatever my idea was, the silly or stupid or funny thing that popped into my head, I'll just send myself an email, and later I transcribe those into a notebook. And then on Saturday mornings, I have time set aside every week to at least make sure I write at least once a week. And I'll sit down and take a look at all the things that I had come up with during the week. Things that are just too ridiculously stupid or really have no business being there, I'll disregard. And then it comes to something I learned at Stand-Up University, which was the second course I took, with 2 really incredible instructors, Rich Walker and Peter Bales. And they taught me topic, premise, punch. Topic, premise, punch. What's your topic? What's the premise you can develop from it? And where's the funny? So that's my method. What's the topic? What's my premise about that topic? And how do I get to the funny as quickly as possible? And that's something I'm really working on hard, because I do tend to talk too much. There's too much time in between laughs. So I'm working very hard on cutting out all the fat and just getting to the funny.
What's the most important thing for a stand-up comedian to remember?
I don't know that at this level of experience that I'm really capable of giving anybody else in comedy advice about what's the most important thing. But I guess if it was, if a gun was put to my head, I would say, be yourself. Get up there and just have a good time. The audience is either going to laugh or they're not. But each and every time, hopefully you're going to get a bunch of laughs. And if not, hopefully you learn something. Listen to those recordings afterwards and find out where the funny really is. There's one thing that I know that I learned there are actually a couple of things that I learned from my courses that I took. One was always be nice to all the staff at the comedy club, because you never know who you're going to be nasty to, who's going to say, you know what, don't book that guy anymore because he was a real a-hole to me. So certainly one thing was be nice to the staff. And the other one that got beat into me in the first class I took was, when a promoter says, 7 minutes, that's not 7 minutes and 15, and it's not 6:45. It's give them what they're asking for. Be on time, be professional, show up early. So I think all those things are important for stand-up comedians to remember.
What do you think are the best techniques for dealing with hecklers?
Does not apply.
What do you think are the biggest mistakes that stand-up comedians make?
I think some of the biggest mistakes I see are people who are nervously wandering around. They can't stand still at all. They're shifting from foot to foot or walking around the stage aimlessly. I think that's a mistake. Not making eye contact with the audience is a big mistake. And of course, one of the biggest mistakes is stepping over the laughter. In sales, which is my area of expertise, I teach people that silence can often be their best friend. And I've come to see that in comedy, it's the same thing. Sometimes just staring at the audience makes them laugh, but it's telling a joke and not giving them enough time to react and laugh is a huge mistake. And I think that's maybe one of the biggest ones that stand-ups make.
What is the best way to learn stand-up comedy?
I think it's everything. Read books. There's a million good books on stand-up comedy. Get out to open mics. Get out and do it. But for me, it was taking classes. I've taken 2 different classes in stand-up comedy. One was taught by one gentleman. Another was taught by 2 gentlemen. All 3 of them professionals, really expert people who helped show me how to write better and how my stage presence. So it's really do everything you can. If you're serious about becoming a stand-up comedian, do everything you possibly can. Invest in your own career. But mostly it's getting up there and experimenting. Does this joke work if I say it this way? What if I look a different way or act a different way? You got to keep trying to come up with what actually works for you.
What do you think is the best way to improve as a stand-up comedian?
The best way to improve is keep doing it. Just keep doing it. Record your sets, videotape your sets. And I often will ask other comedians for feedback. And usually comedians are pretty quick to give feedback if you invite them to do it, and you're not going to get defensive. I always say, look, I don't have to tell you. I don't need you to tell me that I'm good if I had a good set. Tell me what I could do better. Give me some advice, because there's lots of people with way more experience than me who know the little tricks that can make a big difference. So ask for feedback, but mainly it's get up there and do it over and over and over.
What has stand-up comedy taught you about yourself?
Well, for sure, one of the things that stand-up has taught me about myself is that it's never too late. I started doing stand-up at 66 years old. I tried it twice. I tried it twice, almost 30 years earlier, and realized that even if I worked very, very hard, there was almost no chance of financial success. So I walked away from it and said, this isn't for me. But picking it up again at the age of 66 just shows me that it's never too late to follow your dream.
What motivates you to keep performing stand-up comedy?
Oh, that's easy. I love it. I love the feeling of taking the stage, staring at an audience, having them look up at me with anticipation. There's that thought in their head, is this guy going to be funny? Is he going to make me laugh? And then starting the conversation, and when they laugh, it's like heaven. I mean, there's very little in life that I find to be as fulfilling and as much fun as when the audience is laughing with you.
What advice would you give to someone who's thinking about doing stand-up comedy?
Oh, that's easy. Just do it. Just take the risk. Yeah, it might be scary. Yeah, you may not do great your first time or your second time or your 25th time. But if you're thinking about doing stand-up comedy, just go give it a try. It's heavenly when it's working. What's the worst that happens? You blow a couple of jokes, maybe somebody yells something nasty, but you gave it a shot. And I think that I have ultimate respect for anybody who's willing to take the risk and get on stage and try stand-up. I don't appreciate everything they do. I don't laugh at every joke, but anybody who has the balls to get up on a stage and try to make people laugh, they have my respect. Even if I don't respect their talent, I certainly respect their chutzpah, which is an Irish word for balls. But give it a shot. What do you have to lose?
I've been your host, Rob Chaffee. Don't forget to laugh today. It's good for you. Comedy Reset Spotlight is a podcast that brings you today's freshest and funniest comedy creators. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to hear more.